Let's look at what at least I can take away from the life of Nani Palkhivala. These are his words, I quote. Never before in the history of the court has there been a performance like that. It was not Nani who spoke, it was divinity speaking through him. Such arguments may not be heard in this court for centuries to come. It is the height of eloquence and advocacy of unparalleled merit.
Yeah. It must have been more than just brilliant advocacy. It was Nani's pure spiritual energy, which he
Says which he unleashed. Let's fast forward. Palkhivala goes to the United States as an ambassador. A journalist from Washington Post says two things about a diplomat. Palkhivala, the diplomat, he says, one was his utter frankness. The other was that he spoke from his heart and that his sincerity was evident.
Puvaya and Co., who will be giving a lecture on Nani Palkhivala, the man and what made him who he was.
Thank you, Arjun. Very good evening to all of you, and greetings on Samvidhan Divas or Constitution Day. Distinguished guests, Dr. Sondhi, professors, law teachers, my friend and co-panelist Prashant, and my dear friends and students. First, I am humbled to speak after someone so august as Dr. Sondhi. I have said this to him privately many times, and now I say publicly that I have learned much from him, and for that I am indebted to him. Like all of you, I am also inspired by the words that he spoke. Coming to my topic, speech on the legacy of Nani Palkhivala. As I understand it, in the words of Mahatma Gandhi, when Gandhiji was asked, "What is your message, Babu?" He said, "My life." 12th century saint, poet, philosopher from Karnataka, Basavanna, said, if I can just put it in English, he said, if what I have said is put on one side of a scale and how I have lived is put on the other side, there will not be an ounce of difference. Therefore, our tradition is to measure legacies not by words but by deeds. Keeping that in mind, let's look at what at least I can take away from the life of Nani Palkhivala. Let's begin with, we'll do a little flashback. First, we'll go to 1975, 10th of November, when Keshavananda Bharati review was heard. 10th and 11th, the review was heard. 12th, the bench was dissolved. Justice H.R. Khanna, one of the judges who heard that review, these are his words, I quote. Never before in the history of the court has there been a performance like that. It was not Nani who spoke. It was divinity speaking through him. Such arguments may not be heard in this court for centuries to come. It is the height of eloquence and advocacy of unparalleled merit. Can we, Arjun, play that small clip of how Mr. Harris describes Mr. Palkhivala's performance that day?
The audio is not coming. Yeah.
It must have been more than just brilliant advocacy. It was Nani's pure spiritual energy, which he
Says which he unleashed. So, for me, the quest to understand the legacy of Palkhivala began with these utterances. It looks like everybody says that day was something extraordinary. Was that extraordinariness brought about just by sheer logic, or was there more to the man who was in court that day? Because one thing is certain about Nani Palkhivala. Some causes that he did in court were not cases, they were his causes. He was the brief. And for him, the welfare of the nation was the brief. How did that come about? Let's now go back to young Palkhivala. There is a very beautiful book called Nani Palkhivala Early Writings, 1937 to 1947. This was when Palkhivala was 17 to 27. He was born in 1920. Collection of his writings in various newspapers of that time. The one thing that I took away from his legacy as a lawyer, as to the man that made him such a great lawyer, was he had exceptional knowledge, not just of English language, but of the literature. And why is that relevant? Because that's the language we deal in the courts. So just to give an example of the profoundness of his his knowledge of English, and at an age so young, he says in one of his articles, I quote, "I for one would as soon think of writing a book in basic English as of painting in watercolors on tissue paper. Basic English is merely the ossified remains of the real language." So this was his love for the language. The scholarly articles that he has written, honestly, the number of authors that he mentions, I have only read about them. I have not read before at 39. And it looks like he had mastered all of those by the time he was 27 at least. Let me give one more example of how deep his knowledge was. He is now talking about Thomas Hardy. He says, like Thackeray's Vanity Fair, The Return of the Native was the first of its author's greatest works. Like Vanity Fair again, it contains its author's best long passage. So the depth of his knowledge of literature was not just having read, but also analysis. I think one takeaway for me from that was it is that which gave him the ability to marshal facts, to use or to wield the English language to make a point effectively and elegantly. I also saw some very interesting writings by Nani Palkhivala, for example, on democracy. He quotes Oscar Wilde and says, will democracy someday become not of the people, by the people, but to bludgeon the people? So such quotes from him, one can go on seeing in courts. The influence of this literature one sees when he comes up with certain very fascinating quotes. In Keshwananda Bharati, he says, the parliament is not given the power to become the official liquidator of the constitution. The parliament cannot assist in the legal suicide of the constitution. So he coins those phrases. It appears to me that the ability to coin those phrases on the spot comes from his vast learning and ability when it comes to literature. The other famous thing that Nani Palkhivala says we have a third-rate democracy under a first-rate constitution. So these beautiful, catchy phrases, I think, come from his great learning. So that was one takeaway for me. The other was there is a myth of sorts. I don't know how prevalent it is that the studious folk should get into academia, and that studiousness and legal practice don't necessarily go hand in hand. There is a myth like that. At least I have heard it. Nani Palkhivala is the greatest example to shatter that myth altogether. He stood first in perhaps every exam that he gave. He was extremely studious. And there is another portion of the video that I could not play where Mr. Harris Salve says that he was perhaps one of the best advocates that the country has seen. Now let us move to Palkhivala, the budding lawyer. All of us know that at a very young age, when he was in his 20s, he co-authored, or he largely authored realistically, Kanga and Palkhivala on tax. He was at that time reading in the chambers of Jamshedji Kanga. There was a very interesting development there. One Mr. Sampath Iyengar, who had also written a book on tax, files a copyright action before the Madras High Court. I will read out one paragraph about young Palkhivala. He was either 30 or less because the judgment is reported in 1951. And this is about the judge delivering a verdict on Palkhivala as a witness. And I quote, the examination of PW1 and DW1, Palkhivala was DW1, was elaborate and detailed, and DW1 fared better in cross-examination than PW1. He stood a detailed and skillful cross-examination exceedingly well and was not materially shaken on any point, and struck me as a competent and alert lawyer who was thoroughly conversant with the Income Tax Act and law and was very well informed with every part of his book and could give a cogent account of any part of it regarding the scheme, arrangement, analysis, conclusion, criticism, etc. He struck me also as giving his evidence in a straightforward fashion. What struck me was this sentence. He struck me also as giving his evidence in a straightforward fashion. Let's fast forward. Palkhivala goes to the United States as an ambassador. A journalist from Washington Post says two things about a diplomat, Palkhivala the diplomat. He says, one was his utter frankness. The other was that he spoke from his heart and that his sincerity was evident. Between the young Palkhivala at 29 or 30 and Palkhivala the ambassador, there is 30 years. It looks like this remained constant. A man known for his candor, a man known for his honesty, a man who speaks straight. When asked about socialism, Palkhivala famously said, it is transfer of wealth from the honest rich to the dishonest rich. He says, you can't give milk everybody by running the cow dry. You have to produce the milk first. Then somebody asked him, so then does capitalism appeal to you? He quotes Gandhiji. He says, get into business to earn money, but stay in there to do good. He says Gandhiji described capitalism at its best when he said this. Therefore, it is beyond doubt that Palkhiwala's heart was beating for social justice. He simply disagreed with the method. He said socialism is not right because we don't produce enough material for it to be distributed. In fact, when he praises Jamshedji Tata or JRD Tata, Palkhivala says, and this is young Palkhivala, before he was 27, well before he had joined the house of Tatas. He says he's a great man because he intends to make charity unnecessary. So his heart was always in the right place. It always pulsated for having every Indian have sufficient access to resources. It's just that he thought the method of doing it, socialism as a method, was completely flawed, at least in the manner in which it was applied in the country. Therefore, the second takeaway I have from the man Palkhivala is he was honest. His candor was well known. A third example of his candor, an interesting incident in his life. All of us know that he represented the then Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, in her matter in the Supreme Court. Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan, when he applied for stay on her behalf against the verdict of the Allahabad High Court, which had disqualified her. And a limited order of stay was granted. Soon after that, Indira Gandhi declares emergency. Palkhivala immediately returns the brief to her. We are now in the 1970s. By this time, Nani Palkhivala is already on the board of Tata Sons by 67. He is on the board of many Tata companies. Many people in the Tata group say, look, you're taking on the Prime Minister, you're returning her brief. He stays steadfast. He says, I'm returning it because it's a call of the conscience. He is then criticized. He's compared to a doctor abandoning a patient. He does not respond. But interestingly, Rajmohan Gandhi, Gandhiji's grandson, responds in a public letter. He says, first, there was adequate time for preparation. And two, he did not give up the brief because of a personal matter. He gave up the brief because he disagreed with what the government was doing. Let us for a moment step back and imagine a lawyer at the height of his powers, who is representing the Prime Minister, returning the Prime Minister's brief to say, my conscience does not permit me to represent you after you have declared emergency. And yet, his personal relationship with the then Prime Minister remained cordial. Did this have a play in making his arguments in Keshavananda Bharati spiritual? That is, like I said earlier, it was his cause. The sincerity of his voice, the sincerity of his actions, where he forsook or gave up prominence in public life and took the path, the more difficult path. Was that also at play? And is that why Justice H.R. Khanna said that his performance was almost divine? I don't know. I'm just trying to find reasons as I see that. The other thing that Nani Palkhivala was known to do was to constantly criticize tax laws in the country. And his criticism was never unnecessarily camouflaged in sugar-coated language. It was direct. All one has to do is pick up any number of his writings and speeches. The criticism is constant. He says we have one of the worst taxation regimes in the country, etc., etc. Why I say all of this is, as it is the same Nani Palkhivala who year after year criticized judgments, who was called upon to be the lawyer for the Prime Minister's person, while he continuously criticized the policies of the Prime Minister. Therefore, he did his duty as a lawyer. More importantly, he also continuously did his duty as a citizen. And there, he never said, will I lose a brief and therefore should I stay quiet? That was not Palkhivala at all. All of us know that he did the Privy Purses cases. What we don't know is he did not take fees for it. Whatever fees he got, he gave it away in charity. It may not be a very big thing, but the reason I mention it is subsequently, there is a written record to say, Palkhivala used to say, especially after Keshavananda Bharati review, that I am not interested in cases, I am interested in causes. But it looks like that was already happening from R.C. Cooper onwards, and I will come to that. I just want to play a 2-second or a 20-25 second video on what he thought about the Privy Purses case. Aryan, can you please play the other
Yes,
audio?
sir. Yeah.
Frankly, this is the 25th Amendment. The 26th Amendment proposes to abolish the privy purses. Frankly, believe me, I have no affection whatsoever, and if you'll forgive my saying so, very little of respect for most of the recipients of the privy purse. But to me, as to Rajaji, it is only a matter of principle. The real question is it worthwhile dragging in the mire the good name of your country for the sake of 4.5 crores of rupees, which is a sum dwindling year after year as the Maharajas die. Now,
So the question is, why did he do the privy purses case? He was not beholden to the clients. He says so. He did not keep the fees. The only explanation is he did it for a matter of principle. He says, if we as a country have given a promise and put that promise in our constitution, how unfair is it and how immoral is it for us to amend the constitution and take away a promise? In fact, he, in that context, quotes, I think, Nikita Khrushchev, one of the Russian premiers, who says, Sardar Patel achieved liquidation of the princely states without liquidating the princes. Says this was a great achievement by India, that with largely the annexation of the princely states was peaceful. It is in that context that Rajaji and Palkhivala say, this is not done, this is immoral. This was the privy purses case. Now let's come to R.C. Cooper. The ordinance was challenged by Palkhivala in 2 days. 1. 2. Some of these texts that I have say that he dictated the petition in 2 hours. He used to live in Mumbai. He flew to Delhi, dictated on the Sunday. He dictated the petition. Monday the matter was filed. Tuesday or Wednesday there was a stay. Again, bank nationalization he did not do for fees. He did it for free. He didn't in privy purses case. He took some fees and he gave it away. Bank nationalization, he did not take fees. The reason I'm saying that is, it may not be very relevant, but when we look at his legacy, he was representing these causes. He was not just doing these cases. He believed that there was no power to nationalize banks, and he also believed that it was not good for the nation. And therefore, he put his might behind that effort to challenge it. Because he was a lawyer, courts were his place. He challenged it in the courts. So that was bank nationalization. Now let's come to Keshavanand Bharati. In Keshavanand Bharati, that is before the review, when we read accounts of some of the judges, we see a slightly different Palkhivala, slightly more tactical Palkhivala. Some of the judges say he was repeating himself. But some other judges say he was doing that because he wanted to make sure that this debate takes place not just in the court halls, but also in the press. He wanted that message to go to the press as well. So there, he wanted Keshavanand Bharati to be argued not just in the courts, but also amongst the people. It is in that context that he made that famous analysis. He says there is a power to amend this constitution. There is no power to abrogate this constitution, because if you amend it out of shape, then this constitution does not survive. So, and he coined these catchy phrases: you cannot become the official liquidator of the constitution. So there one sees Palkhivala's sheer legal brilliance, his astuteness in using the court as a forum to also communicate these points to the people. But at the bottom of all of it, at least as far as I understand Palkhivala, it was to him an honest battle that he fought, where he believed that these amendments were bad for the country. Therefore, in all these 3 big cases, contrary to what most of us have been told to do and also regularly do, which is retain our objectivity as lawyers and present the case by being disaffected and detached to the cause. The three big cases that Palkhivala did, they were his cause. And therefore, maybe, when finally the day came, in Keshavanand Bharati's review, and Justice H.R. Khanna said what he said, because he was representing that cause, it went beyond just a legal argument. It was an impassioned plea for the welfare of the country, and it struck a chord. We must bear one fact in mind. Keshavanand Bharati review was before ADM Jabalpur. Therefore, there was every possibility that but for Palkhiwala's brilliance, Keshavanand Bharati would have been reviewed. And if it had been reviewed, certainly we would not be celebrating now as Constitution Day. It would be somewhere in the 1975, because our Constitution would have been practically rewritten then. Why did he not appear in ADM Jabalpur? It looks like he said, oh no, there is no way that this will be upheld. You don't need me. I don't need to go. He didn't go, and ADM Jabalpur, we all know, now it finally stands overruled and consigned to history. Immediately after this, he was appointed ambassador to the United States. From all public accounts, it looks like he was a first-rate diplomat. After he comes back, it is he who says, we need to fix this. We need to, and therefore takes up Minerva Mills. When Minerva Mills concludes, and there is a judgment respecting the rights of the citizen, I am told he was in tears, saying, now I have done my duty for the nation. So to me, the legacy of Palkhivala is a lawyer who practiced in some sense what Gandhiji said. He got into the business and then he stayed in there to do good. And it is the force of the man who stayed in there to do good that helped us during times of great crisis. 2-3 other features of the legacy of Palkhivala. He was a deeply patriotic man. He was an Indophile of the highest order. If one looks at any of his writings, he holds India in the highest esteem. In fact, he says ancient texts must be taught in schools and colleges. He quotes Aurobindo, Gandhiji, and Tagore far more than he quotes Magna Carta. He repeatedly quotes Arnold Toynbee, who says, what had a Western beginning must have an Indian conclusion. In that sense, he was deeply committed to the cause of India. He deeply believed that this country has something to offer to the world. And it is in that light that he said we must protect our constitution so that we can protect this heritage which this nation has to contribute to the world. In conclusion, Nani Palkhivala wrote a beautiful poem for Gandhiji on 15th of August 1947. Thereafter, when Gandhiji passed away, this is what Nani Palkhivala wrote, I quote, the hatred and fanaticism which consumed the body of the Mahatma did not touch his great soul. Let us go back to his imperishable teaching so that we, who did not deserve Gandhiji during his life, may at least deserve him a little after his death. I wonder if this is true of Palkhivala also. That taking a cue from what Dr. Sondhi was saying, did we deserve Nani Palkhivala? Are we doing enough to deserve him today? I don't know. Thank you.